PhD dissertation from the University of Montana, dealing specifically with issues that I've been encountering more or less in the professional workplace that are contending with the interface of preservation or conservation, archaeology, and landscape, and how all of these elements are combining. What are the challenges that we're facing, especially in the United States and in the Western United States where I live and work, and how we might be bringing in some other models, other ways of thinking, and other approaches to facing some of these challenges. So real quickly in this slide, this is a good example of some of that interface that I'm talking about. A vanishing landscape, but also one that has a lot that is hidden within this particular frame where you cannot see of the hundreds of semi and unmarked grave sites that date back into certainly antiquity. This includes Native American peoples and multiple cultural narratives that we would experience in the Western United States, including Chinese culture, multiple European cultures, and Americans of birth. So also following some of the instruction that we received, I also want to address some of these Sustainable Development Goals, specifically 4 and 4.71, education for sustainable development, and looking at cities and communities, and specifically land consumption, land use, and how population growth has really become one of the more prominent drivers that we are facing, especially in the West and certainly elsewhere. Partnerships with these goals, how these partnerships might be expanded beyond the norm, how we might get more creative in exploring these partnerships. And for this purpose, we're looking at these supporting roles that are leading to sustained importance or repurposing or adaptation, adaptive reuse, looking at more effective and practical land use and environmental planning processes, scale and spatial considerations, stewardship and sustainability, and education, and this model that I kind of loosely term K through gray, which is a way of looking at this spanning generations, how we may incorporate educational programs that help everyone from kindergarten, young students, all the way to having older generations participate in these processes and this cross-pollination, including cultures and communities in this discussion. My research, I should say, has been went on for almost 5 years, and I just wanted to provide a couple of visuals of the areas that we're talking about here. I concentrated some comparative research from this portion of the United States, which is where I live in western Montana, which is right along the edge of the Rocky Mountain front, and how that interfaces with the Canadian border. Also looking at features and sites in the southern part of the Netherlands, primarily in communities like Amsterdam, Delft, Leiden, and down to Maastricht. So to just bring this to the point of origin, and to one of the sites that I've been working now for 16 years, the Virginia City National Historic Landmark. And Montana is a state that is rather unique in that it's bookended by World Heritage Sites. There's a national park, Glacier National Park in the north, and Yellowstone National Park in the south, and a landscape that is exceptionally diverse that includes everything from plains all the way into high mountain environments. Now this particular site, my roles here have changed over the years from working for state government into local government, and also looking at these resources in the context of these other compounding considerations, not just buildings and structures, not just archaeology, but how this fits into a greater contextual dynamic that is taking place in the West. And that involves change. There is significant change that is occurring now in an area that has been rather overlooked for a period of years after the great land rush of the late 19th century of people moving west. We've now started to see this new exodus into the western states, and the statistics are now starting to support how this is occurring, but also trying to understand why this diaspora is now occurring too as part of this. There are a lot of compounding socioeconomical reasons, but we're also seeing how this is happening now and compounding on the local level. And so concentrations are now starting to form around these resources and what is making it attractive for people to come and move, or also, in some cases, make changes. Now, getting back to that first wave, you have sites in cities and communities like Butte, Montana, which rose to fame for its mining, which started off in the turn of the 20th century with the establishment of these company towns and larger corporate involvement, and some of the effects that now have led to this impacts upon the landscape, oddly enough, have now become part of its heritage. And this is part of a source of intense local pride, ironically enough, but part of where education is becoming more crucial for this population to understand these compounding changes. Along with the man-made changes we're contending with intense national change due to, or natural changes due to climate change and compounding effects on the environment. Wildfires are a constant threat in this part of the world. This is literally taken from about 2 miles from my home in 2017, where we dealt with some incredibly scary conditions involving wildfires. This is still an ongoing threat. Among these threats, too, are the loss of heritage that's occurring both in rural environments and in urban environments. And this is a case study in particular in Missoula, where the university is just at the foot of this hill here. And it's also in that ground zero of the smoke I was just showing you a moment ago. But this building here has become the mitigation strategy for the loss of this entire block, which dates back to the 19th century. It was bought by the Marriott Hotel Corporation. So you can see where the drivers are starting to really become the changing factors in these communities that had been rather sleepy or dormant for several years. But this is really happening at an intensifying pace. So this has led me to seeking out other models and talking with other people. And through the literature research that I did to support my dissertation, it really opened my eyes to the work with folks like Mark Antrop, and particularly Jan Colin, as we looked at landscape as this biography, with stories to tell, and again, these multiple cultural narratives that lend to it. So I've come to the Netherlands to study with folks and to learn a bit more about how they're looking at space, how they're looking at heritage, how they're looking at their landscape, and how these are all combining to form these new modern paradigms. And looking at that juxtaposition of new and old, and being able to interview folks like Mr. Korten that brought an ethnographic lens to my research, which was not an initial part or consideration, but I realized it's through this interview process and through discussions with people, you're learning a lot more than just coming and doing survey work and analysis of buildings and or sites. So this led me to one of the more premier heritage sites in the world, to the Anne Frank House, and where I went in with the expectations to look at this from a building and a spatial set of considerations. I, in turn, found one of those instances where your research expectations completely turned 180. And I ended up looking at this in the way that I came out of this experience, which was nothing like I expected when I went in. It literally transformed my life. It transformed my way of approaching this. And I'm sure it had no small part to play in the fact of my being a father to a daughter as well. So you start looking at, again, the storytelling, that narrative portion, and how that has such incredible power to reverse historical apathy and turn it into something of historical empathy. Getting people engaged again to make them care and help them understand it better. I also had the good fortune through my work with the Center for Integrated Research in the Environment at University of Montana. We deal with a lot of military-related projects, Department of Defense, and so I had the good fortune to visit Friedbasis Soesterberg and visit with folks there and also see how adaptive reuse is being put together and changed along the way. This has also led me to talking with folks at Monument Watch. I had the good fortune to meet Albert Van Kies at a conference at Columbia University over a decade ago, and he and I have remained good friends and colleagues, and he's helped me to understand through this methodology and their subscription approach, you were able to look at heritage and bring it to everything beyond just national paradigms and into other distribution throughout the country. And so having these offices and that local knowledge I found really important. So how does this translate to approaches in America? The Research Institute at Virginia City that I started over a decade ago has now spiraled into a new approach of the Bannock Preservation Institute, which is now incorporating Montana State Parks, and 2 NGOs. The Adventures in Preservation becomes a facilitator for these projects that helps to bring in folks from all around the world to work side by side. And it's also being funded now through that very crucial funding element into these approaches here. This is the site I'm talking about, as you can see, where the interface of landscape preservation and archaeology are coming together, allowing us to bring in students from around the world, and that next generation, like I was referring to, having children and the older adults working side by side in tool use, proper methodologies, research into then applied science and technologies, line slating, creating these actual formulas based on historical research. Thank you very much.